Okay, and we're live. The man behind the cookbooks. Let's introduce Kurma Prabhu. Haribol Kurma Prabhu, thank you for joining me.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. This is
Lovely to be
episode. Yes, thank you so much. Thank you. This is episode 43 of the Late Morning Program with Namaras Podcast. I'm here with Kurma Prabhu. Kurma Prabhu is the worldwide renowned ISKCON chef. He has this amazing cookbooks here that I grew up reading and looking at the pictures as I was mentioning to him earlier. And I'm just so honored to have you, Prabhu, on the show.
Well, I'm very honored to be here. Thank you very much for giving me your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So we want to hear a lot about the man behind the recipes. Everyone knows your recipes. Everyone knows, the cookbooks and everything like that. But we want to know a little bit more about your life. So let's just start out. Tell us a little bit about your early life.
Well, I was fascinated with food from a very early age. I had what's known as an oral fixation. It's called anamaya, or dependence upon foodstuffs for one's existence.
Right.
I had a bad case of it. I always used to enjoy my food. I remember my mother, she reminded me that when I was a very young lad, from when, must have been from 3 or 4 years old, or maybe even earlier, the mantra that she would always say is, slow down, son. No one's going to take it away from you. And that seemed to be the way my life went. I was very much, I enjoyed eating. It was a big part of my life.
Right.
And I was born in a Jewish family in Essex, in England, 1952. I was actually born on a Codicy. I was born on Gita Jayanti, actually.
Wow.
And so my first day I spent fasting, and then I tried to make up for it for the rest of my life. And so I was born in Essex, and I grew up with a very happy childhood. I was born in the beginning of my Venus period. If you're born in your astrological Venus period, it means you have a very, very happy time. So that first 16 years of my life was spent enjoying my youth. Actually, when I was born breech birth, mid forceps. So my mother tells me, which means I basically came out bum first.
Oh, right.
And I think what happened was I turned around. I thought, oh no, not another life. I changed my mind, and I thought I'd just crawl back in. I realized I'd made a terrible mistake. But so anyway, so they had to pull me out with forceps, but anyway, I survived the ordeal.
Wow. And then, yeah, go ahead.
No, carry on.
So when was the first time you kind of like met devotees?
Oh, well, that was quite a bit later.
Right.
That was quite a bit later. But I spent my youth, searching for spiritual things. I had a lot of mystical things happen to me when I was young, and I started veering towards India and the culture and the philosophy of India gradually, which is a long story. But by the time I reached 17, I actually met the devotees.
Can you tell us a little bit about the like you said, some mystical experiences?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. And I look back at this, and at the time, I didn't think it was very significant. But then when I look back at it, one day I was thinking, hey, I think I can understand what was going on. I used to walk to school. In those days, no one drove to school or got a bus to school because everyone was into walking, and It was safe. So I was about a mile or two from the school, but I would walk to school from the age of 6 or 7. And every day when I walked to school, and especially when I walked home from school, I would have this sort of realization that there was somebody or something inside me watching what I was doing. And it appeared to me like a TV screen with a test pattern on it. I couldn't see who or what was there, but in my mind's eye, there was a TV, and there was some person or being who was observing my activities. And on the way home from school every day, I would relate all the things that had happened to me during the day. It became like a regular thing. I would say, oh yeah, well, Billy Lovelock punched me in the face today, and, and I fell over in the schoolyard and grazed my knee.
Right.
And I used to just relate all these things in a very innocent way to this person or personality, although I didn't conceive that this was God or anything like that. But when I look back, I realized there was perhaps something coming from some sort of previous life. That's the only way I can describe it. And when I used to fall asleep at night, and I used to think this happened to everybody, but I found out that apparently it didn't. As I was falling asleep at night, I would have an out of body experience, and I would separate from my body, and I would float above my bed, and I would float around the room and look down and feel
Wow.
very wonderful experience. And then all of a sudden, after 2 or 3 minutes, I would just feel this sort of like jolt, and I'd be back inside my body. And I just thought it was sort of what you did when you were a kid. But then I found out that it was perhaps something not everyone experienced. But it was an interesting. There were interesting things like that happened to me.
So then you said you met the devotees you were 17?
Yeah, well, what happened was, that's also a long story, but my parents actually met the devotees before I did.
Wow.
My father was coming home from work one day, and something yellow caught his eye, and he was leaving the Wynyard station in Sydney, downtown Sydney, in the middle of the central business district. And there was this devotee with bright yellow kurta, bright yellow dhoti, and a beautiful yellow turban. And that was Upendra.
Oh.
And Upendra had come to Australia on the orders of Srila Prabhupada, along with Bali Mardan, 2 devotees, one from the East Coast, one from the West Coast. They never knew each other, but they met up in Australia.
Wow.
Fascinating story how Upendra got to be there. He got to be there sort of by accident, but this was Krishna's arrangement. And he started going out into the street every day with Bali Mardan. One of them would play the drum and sing, and the other one would distribute back to Godheads, and then they would swap. And this was 1970. I was in my second last year of school. And my dad came home from work, and he said, look, I met this guy today, and he said that he stopped me in the street, and he handed me this leaflet, because they'd run out of Back to Godheads, and all they had was a single sheet. It was, what is the Sankirtan movement? And it was only one-sided piece of paper.
Right.
And he held it out to my dad. Upendra held it out to my dad. My dad held onto the piece of paper and was about to keep walking, but then Upendra tugged on it. This was one of our notorious literature techniques in the old days to get people to stop. And then my dad would be pulling on one side, and Upendra was pulling, and then my dad was finally stopped. And Upendra said, could you spare a couple of bob for this? Couple of bob means like 20 cents in Australian slang. And my father was shocked. He said, like, 2 bob for a piece of paper? My dad had this, what was called long pockets and short arms, as is described. So anyway, he very reluctantly gave Upendra 20 cents, and he was a bit embarrassed by it all. And he came home and he said, like, I've just got this thing on the street, don't know what it is. This funny looking guy gave it to me, and he gave it to me. And I was fascinated. I'd never seen anything like it, and I kept it. I actually kept it and stuck it up on my wall when I was doing my homework, and I couldn't figure out what this was exactly, but it seemed to be very attractive to me. And then, not long afterwards, my mother, who was working in an Indian handicrafts boutique in an exclusive Sydney suburb of Double Bay, and there was this lady called Jyoti Ray, who was a Bengali Indian artifacts importer. So my mother was working behind the counter, and one day another devotee, she met Upananda, who was the first devotee to join the temple. He was the 3rd devotee to appear on the scene in Australia after Upendra and Bali Madan, and he came in asking for wanting to buy some vases for the temple that they had just opened.
Oh my gosh.
So she sold them these vases, and then she came home from work, and I'd just come home from school, and I was raiding the cupboard looking for chocolate. And she said to me, I met a monk today. And I'd been reading some books about Tibetan Buddhism. And I said, oh, you met a monk. I said, was he Tibetan? And she said, no, he was from California. And I said, what? And that also didn't quite make sense. And then a short time afterwards, I belonged to this Jewish youth group called Habonim, and we all used to hang out together. And I was very shy and reticent. And my friend said, you need to meet people, because I used to hang around the house listening to Indian classical music and burning incense. And I bought a kurta, a pink kurta. I was very attracted to kurtas. So I used to sit around the house wearing a kurta, burning incense and listening to Indian classical music. And they said, you've got to get out, you've got to meet some people, get a life.
Right.
So they talked me into going along to this regular youth club on a Saturday. It took me weeks and weeks to finally get there. I got on the bus, and when I got there, little did I know that they'd moved venues and they weren't going to be meeting at this place anymore. So I walked in the building. It was all deserted. I walked to the room that they told me that where the meeting was going to be, and there was nothing in the room at all. Nothing, whatever was there was moved out, except right in the middle of the floor was the number 36 edition of Back to Godhead magazine, brand new, sitting in the middle of the floor. So I walked in, looked around, no one there, picked it up, brought it home. And that was my first Back to Godhead magazine. And in the magazine, there were pictures of devotees in New York doing Sankirtan. Beautiful pictures. And I thought, oh, well, maybe these are the monks. And it all sort of started to come together. And then a friend of mine called Mark, my school friend, best friend at school, he said, I went to a temple today. Would you like to come along with me? He met the devotees and he invited me to come along to the first, well, it wasn't the first, but they'd moved to this new temple in Oxford Street in Paddington, a trendy sort of suburb. And by then there was about 7 or 8 devotees living in the temple, maybe 9 actually. And by then Churu and Vaibhavi, who I'm sure you're familiar with.
Yes, of course, yeah.
There's a whole backstory to course, and this is all narrated in my book, The Great Transcendental Adventure.
Right.
And they'd moved in the temple, and Churu was and his wife were doing very active preaching. And I went to the temple, and Churu was giving a evening Bhagavad Gita class. And I walked in, and all I can remember was that he was talking about something about 3-legged chairs in the street. At least that's what I thought it was. He was talking about stools in the street. He was telling me how dogs, and he was very graphic in his presentation. So, but I was imagining that he was talking about 3-legged chairs. I'd never heard the word stools before. Anyway, I didn't understand much what he was talking about. But afterwards, Vaibhavi served out to all the guests hot banana milk with nutmeg and slices of orange and slices of figs that had been in the refrigerator, and they were very nice and chilled. So our first prasadam was figs and oranges and hot milk. So that was my first prasadam, and I was hooked. And that night she sold me a Nectar of Devotion, which I brought home, and I read it cover to cover, although I didn't understand much of it. But I presume I became somewhat purified. And she did tell me that night that, you can make this is called prasadam, and it's sacred food, and you can make your own sacred food at home. And I said, wow, how do I do that? She said, well, you just make some food or get some fruit, and you put it in front of a picture of Krishna, and you ask him to accept it. I said, oh, I can do that. So I got my Back to Godhead magazine that I had in my room, and I propped it up against the wall, and I thought, oh, I'll make an experiment. So I went into the kitchen and juiced 4 or 5 nice big oranges, and I juiced them and put them in a glass, and I brought the glass into my office and put it in front of the Back to Godhead magazine and said, here you go, Krishna, this is a glass of orange juice for you. And I left the room. Somehow or other, I knew that I should leave the room while the offering was going on. I don't know how I figured that out. But then I came back later, 10 minutes later, and I said, okay, I'm going to drink this orange juice now. And I drank it, and the taste was spectacular. I'd never experienced anything like it. It was like orange juice from heaven.
Wow.
So that was, and anyway, lots of little things like that happened to me. And, the happiest time of my life, of course, was coming to Krishna consciousness.
Yeah.
And then a few weeks later, Prabhupada was scheduled to arrive in Australia, which was quite a surprise for us all. And what happened was that I was coming along to the temple regularly, and then it was time for me to go to university. I'd left school, my final exams. I'd failed miserably, but somehow or other I got into university. Bought my textbooks and I enrolled in an economics course, but I wasn't really into it. I was losing my taste. I thought, what's the point of all this? And then I said to my mum and dad, look, I'm going to leave university. I'm just really, I don't think I can do this. And they said, no, you shouldn't. You should stick it out. It's important. I said, no, I can't do it. They said, well, okay, well, and I said, look, I want to go and be with the devotees. And they said, well, why don't you just get a job somewhere and visit the devotees, on the weekends or something like that. They were trying to negotiate with me. So I went and looked for a job, came back. I couldn't get a job that day. I thought, I've had enough. I want to move in the temple. So they very kindly, on April the 14th, 1971, the reason it was a Wednesday, the reason I can remember it's a Wednesday is because I'm looking at my calendar here, and 1971 and 2021 have the same calendar.
Oh.
So it was a Wednesday, and I packed a little suitcase, and they drove me to the temple. My mother was crying. They dropped me off, and that was it. And I moved in the temple, and I had this overwhelming desire to go and be with the devotees.
Right.
I just felt like there was nothing else for me to do except move into the temple, which I did.
Wow.
And then 3 weeks later, Prabhupada came.
Amazing. I want to touch on your book a little bit later, but describe your first experience in an ISKCON kitchen. Like when you moved into the temple, was it immediately like you were attracted to like, okay, I got to go into the kitchen and like serve as there?
No, not straight away. Not
Okay.
straight away. The first temple, the kitchen was in the basement, and it was not a very attractive. Although I must say, this is an interesting memory that I have that I'd forgotten about until you just asked me then. But I was going to school at the time, and this was the end of 1970. As I was visiting the temple, I get on a bus and I go to the temple. And one night when I went to the temple, Upananda was in the kitchen cooking gulab jamans for the Sunday feast. So I was in my school uniform and stuff, but I don't think our suchi standards were much in those days. And so he said, would you like to come and help me in the kitchen? So I did, and I was rolling the gulab jamun dough into balls, and he was frying them in ghee.
Ooh.
And it went for hours and hours and hours. But he was telling me all about Krishna consciousness and preaching to me, and it was, I was really enjoying it. So actually, that was my first experience in the kitchen, although I didn't officially go into the kitchen for about another year later, after I got my second initiation.
Oh, wow.
But that was that day in the kitchen with the gulab jamans was impressive.
Right. So you went in there a year later, and then was it like, how did it start as far as like you were just like cutting up stuff, or were you like actually going in there and
I was washing pots.
washing pots? Right.
I think that was the routine. First of all, you have to get your
Badge.
qualifications.
Yes.
First of all, you have to get a bit wet and soapy before you can enter the kitchen. So I was washing pots, and in those days, the temple prasadam was very, very austere. Extremely austere. I mean, I'd become a vegetarian when I was 16, when I was still going to school, and my mother was cooking for me at home.
Oh, wow.
Vegetarian food, which is she would cook like one meal for everyone else and one meal for me. And so, I mean, she was amazing. When I moved in the temple, though, the prasadam was very austere. The breakfast was farina, or as semolina, as we call it in Australia.
Right.
Boiled in water because we couldn't afford milk. And loaded with sugar. And if we really wanted to jazz it up, they would grate some orange peel in it for some special flavor. And that was breakfast. And the Mahaprasadam was Simply Wonderfuls.
Right.
And there would be like, after most of the Simply Wonderfuls had been stolen, there was usually one or two left at breakfast time. And then they would bring the Simply Wonderfuls around and take like 1/20th of a Simply Wonderful and drop it in your bowl of cereal, and you had to grab it before it melted, and it was very austere. And lunch was just like some vegetables and some burnt or overcooked hard bread, sort of like dining in the gulag or something. But it was very austere. So I had this desire came in my heart that I've got to get more to eat. So I thought, if I want to actually get more food, I'm going to have to work in the kitchen, because that seems like that's the place where all the action is. And
Right.
not a very noble, not a very noble reason, but I was a very hungry teenage boy at this time, and
Yeah.
the Temple Prasadam was for some time, for the next 1 or 2 years, until book distribution hit, and then everything became very opulent. But until then, the Prasadam was very austere. So I found that if I could work in the kitchen, I'd be able to sort of like be very close to the Mahaprasadam, and I'd become very expert at stealing the Mahaprasadam.
Mm.
So my
And then
early,
so then you, as you started with washing pots, and then your like training began basically in the kitchen.
yeah, I don't remember all the details, but I know I used to cook Krishna's lunch, and I used to make up stuff because we didn't have any recipes in those days. There were no recipe books. Even the original Hare Krishna cookbook that was the Kirtanananda Swami had put together, somehow or other we didn't have that. And there were, in those early days, no recipes, so I just sort of made it up. I
Wow.
remember it wasn't too bad, but I made it up as I went along. But then, as time went on, there were devotees that, well, actually, this was in Sydney, and I didn't used to get along very well with one devotee, or whose name I won't mention, and he used to sort of tease me and bully me, and we had a very not a very pleasant relationship. So one day I thought, we were on Sankirtan, and I sat down to play the harmonium. I only knew one tune, and I was going to lead the kirtan, and suddenly he came along and took the harmonium from in front of me, put it down in front of him, and started leading the kirtan, and that was the straw that broke the Kurma's back. So I got on a bus. I went back to the temple while everyone was out on Harinam. I packed my bag and I left the temple.
Oh my God.
I just thought, that's it. And I was in my dhoti and my kurta, in my flip flops, and I thought, that's it. I'm going to Melbourne Temple, and I didn't know where Melbourne Temple was.
Mm.
I thought, I heard that it was in St Kilda, the suburb of St Kilda. So I hitchhiked all the way. It was 800 miles. And slept on the side of the road in the middle of the night in the freezing cold. And I finally arrived the next day or two at the Melbourne Temple. And when I arrived, Mohanananda was there as the GBC.
Yeah.
And Mohanananda said, "Hey, Kurma," he said, "we need a temple commander. Would you like to be a temple commander?" And I said, "Yeah, okay, sure." So I became the temple commander, and then life went on in Melbourne. And in Melbourne at the time, there was a devotee called Deepak. And Deepak actually had been in Sydney, but then he came to No, actually, no, at this stage, just Melbourne, I think. Deepak had been trained in Los Angeles how to cook, and he was a very good cook. And there was another devotee called Chitralekha, who was married to Upendra.
Mm.
And Prabhupada and Yamuna and all those original ladies that were in India with Srila Prabhupada and Yamuna, Chitralekha was also there, and so she was trained up to how to become a first-class cook, and her specialty was cooking milk sweets.
Right.
So between Chitralekha Devidasi and Deepak Prabhu, I learned how to cook, and especially I learned how to cook nice milk sweets, and we used to offer them to the deities in the morning. So I started to get training. Otherwise, up until that point, I was just sort of making it up as I went along.
Your training was in Melbourne.
Well, Melbourne and Sydney, because you see, in those days, I went backwards and forwards.
Oh, you did? Okay.
The two temples. They were the only two temples, and between the two, I started to get a taste for being in the kitchen, and then I started cooking Sunday feasts.
Big quantities.
Yeah, well, we were getting 50 or so people at that time.
Right.
But as the years went by, the numbers increased to in the 80s, when in the Melbourne Temple we were getting 700 people for a Sunday feast, and so the quantities started to get big. But the Sunday feasts in those days were very different. The Sunday feasts were like 10 or 12 special dishes, not like some temple Sunday feasts that I've been to since then, where they make like khichdi and papadums or something. But really, they were seriously good, and this was the standard. You wouldn't or you couldn't get away with cooking anything less than 2 or 3 sabjis, 2 savories, 1 or 2 chutneys, a salad, 3 sweets, 1 or 2 drinks, and you'd start cooking the day before. And these were like first class preps, and that became my thing to cook nice Sunday feasts, opulent. We would go through in the heyday of my Sunday feast cooking, we would go through 3 or 4 10-kilo buckets of ghee,
Oh my goodness.
which is 30 or 40 kilos of ghee. You can translate it into pounds, but it was very opulent, very opulent.
Everything in ghee.
Yeah, there was no question of cooking in oil. That was like something that we didn't even dream of. When you fried something, you fried spices or you deep fried, you cook it in ghee. Cooking in oil is something which has come in the last few decades, and it's most unfortunate, but that's how we did it.
Right, right. I mean, some devotees say like, okay, ghee, there's the expense part as well as the health part of it, perhaps. Like, what do you think when people say that? Like, you have seen the from before, like how it was 10, 12 preps, and then you said, papadums and kitchery. Like, how does that make you feel? How does that make you feel? Like, it's disappointing, of course, but like,
Yeah, well, you see, I made a vow that I would share all my Sunday feast recipes after I started to realize that because when I went to America to record my interviews for
okay,
my Prabhupada in Australia book, I met up with a Purva
oh,
Prabhu,
okay, yes,
and he was telling me that he was planning to do a big cookbook. In other words, a cookbook with recipes in for 150, 200 people. In other words, Sunday Feast cookbooks, and he was going to share it with people. This was 30 something years ago,
right.
and he's still working on it, and it's taking a very long time. You see, the problem is with making a cookbook like that is that you have to test the recipes, but you have to test a recipe for 300 people. So you can't just go into the kitchen and whip up a test recipe. You have to cook it in conjunction with a big event,
Right, of course.
and someone has to finance that. Who's going to pay for a huge amount of money to cook all these recipes? It has to be obviously when there's a Sunday feast on or something like that.
Mm.
And so there's been difficulties. I'm still working on my Big Cooks cookbook. I've got 300 to 400 recipes there. I basically wrote down everything that I cooked for my Sunday feast for 15 years and all the quantities. It's in Australian quantities, but it can be easily adjusted. But I haven't been able to find a way of turning them into, double-checked recipes that have to be tested at least once, like I did
Right.
with all my cookbooks. All the recipes in my other cookbooks, of course, they work very well because I tested them very, very religiously.
Mm.
And that's therefore devotees say to me, "Hey, they really work." And I said, "Well, I mean,
Yeah.
they've got to work. What's the point of a cookbook if the recipes don't work?"
Right.
So I'm a bit obsessive, and so I made sure that everything was tested once or twice. But it's very difficult to do that with big quantities. So my determination is to somehow, before I leave this mortal coil, is to have a book in case in the future that there's some sort of revival and Sunday feasts return to their golden days, that there'll be recipes ready to go.
Mm.
So, I've been communicating with Apurva, but somehow or other it's very slow. And now, of course, with the world situation, it's everything's on hold.
Yeah, yeah. Do you know any temples in your area or anywhere else in the world where they still are doing like all ghee and many more than 7
There
preps?
are there
There
are
are.
some. Well, I don't know about all ghee, but I'm just thinking because I've done a load of traveling around for my cooking classes, and I do recall attending Sunday feasts that were really first class.
Mm.
I'm just thinking, for instance, in Almavik's Gård, in the Swedish farm,
Okay.
uh, very very nice prasadam, and there must be other places. I'm just trying to recall if the places pop into my mind.
Yeah.
I'll let you know. There are some devotees out there that really know that it was Prabhupada's desire that the Sunday feast be very spectacular, not
Right.
just middling, but spectacular. And that the people came to the Sunday feast, and literally people would not go home after the Sunday feast. They would say, I'm moving in.
Mm.
If you eat food like this, then I'm not going home. And people would be coming by the dozens. And this was, you read those recollections by the early devotees and how important the Sunday feast was.
Mm.
And everybody, all the devotees would be there, every devotee would sit down next to a guest, and while they were taking prasadam, and they would talk to them and make friends with them. And
Mm.
um,
Another thing is the serving out, isn't it as well? Like nowadays I see that it's like there's you put the serving things, next to each other on a table and everyone queues up or lines up and then but in your time in the older times it was like everyone sit down in a line and everyone gets served out very nicely.
with
I think that's
affection,
changed as
just like
well.
Prabhupada did. Prabhupada did it like that. He sat
Right.
everyone down at 26 Second Avenue. He would walk in those very early days when he would actually cook the feast himself. He would serve it out, and
Yeah.
people would see there's their plate, and they would ask, Prabhupada would be serving it out. He would say, "Would you like the white rice, or would you like the pushpana rice?" And he'd give them a choice. You don't just make one rice for the Sunday feast. You make like a fancy rice with paneer cheese balls, and then there's a buttered white rice, and he would give you, would you like, or some devotees would say, "Oh, I'll take the yellow rice, I'll take the white rice." And Prabhupada would be putting it on your plate, and then he would say, eat more, and then he would come back and come back. So that was the only way that we knew how to serve prasadam. Everyone sat in rows, and then
Right.
for various reasons, um, um, not the least of which is the fact that if you've got like 500 people, there isn't enough place for 500 people to sit down.
Right. Right.
That's one of the reasons why we had to start putting it onto tables and serving it out, because for instance, in Melbourne Temple, people got their prasadam and then they went down and they sat in the garden, they sat in the courtyard, they sat wherever they could find a place because there wasn't enough room in the prasadam room.
Right.
But in those early days, everything was very intimate, and yet we always sat down, and prasadam was served very beautifully. And I mean, because we were neophytes, and sometimes we weren't that enthusiastic to do the serving. We would rather be eating, but at least we were on our way to doing it properly. But yes, so there's many things about Sunday feast which are a disappointment.
Mm.
Include there's many disappointments to older Prabhupada's disciples when it comes
Yes.
to prasadam.
Yeah. Yeah.
Things
I
aren't
hope there.
going.
I hope there is a time where that comes back because I feel like people, I mean, you hear so many stories of people joining Krishna consciousness just because, like you said, people wouldn't leave. Like they joined because they were so attracted to what they were eating. They're like, they had a huge plate of halava and they just ate it and they were like, I want to shave up and join.
Exactly. That's exactly how it was. I remember that happening in Australia. People, they were just like completely intoxicated with prasadam.
Mm, mm, mm.
So yeah,
So,
well, I'm thinking, if some of us Prabhupada disciples, if perhaps we have to take birth again next life in ISKCON and come back and continue the process. If no one else is going to do it, we might have to come back and do it ourselves.
right.
Having said that, there are some very serious boys and girls who have already taken birth in ISKCON who probably were already Prabhupada disciples in a previous life.
Mm,
And they all look like, so many of them look like they've just come from the spiritual world. They're very special souls, and
yeah.
perhaps they have a few years, or one lifetime left to finish up and perfect their devotional service. But there's some very, very serious young boys and girls, and perhaps they'll take up the gauntlet.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So then let talk a little bit about so you were in the kitchen 15 years cooking Sunday feast and then tell us what happened after that.
Well, that was now we've gone forward to 1975 to 1990.
Okay.
Now, 1975 to 1990, I was in Melbourne Temple. I was actually in Sydney Temple, but then Prabhupada was visiting Australia.
Mm,
I took initiation from Prabhupada in that first year, 1971. I got my second initiation in 1972. Then I went into the kitchen and I started, doing serious cooking. In fact, in those days, you'd cook 3 or 4 offerings a day. And if devotees went to Rath Yatra or something like that, someone would have to stay behind, and it was usually me. and you would wake up the deities in the morning, do the Mongol Arati offering, the Arati, and then offer Krishna's breakfast, lunch, evening. And there were 6 offerings and artis a day. Dress the deities in the morning, dress the deities in the evening. And anyway, I was doing that in Sydney, and it was Prabhupada's now 5th visit to Australia, 1975. We all got on and that particular year, I didn't stay behind. I went to the opening of the Melbourne Temple, which is still there now, Radha Vallabha. Prabhupada called it Melbourne Mahaprabhu Mandir, just a spectacular temple.
I love that temple.
And,
Beautiful.
Have you been to Melbourne Temple?
Yeah. I went in 2015 after
Right.
you met Tulsi in Hong Kong. We went there. Oh, beautiful temple, amazing history. I loved it.
Yeah, it's spectacular. So I spent 25 years in Melbourne Temple. That was my, and I would have stayed there for the rest of my life, but circumstances changed as they do. Anyway, Madhur Visa, who is the GBC, he rang me up and he said, now, I'd been to the opening of the temple, and then I'd returned back to Sydney, and I was doing my deity worship service. And Madhur Visa said, look, we need a head pujari. There was one devotee called Dwaipayana, who's here on Facebook, very nice devotee, spectacular cook. He's from my era, and he's in the same mindset as myself. His Sunday feasts were spectacular. He was going to go somewhere else, I think to Fiji or somewhere to do some preaching. Can't remember where. Madhur Visa said, we want you to be the head pujari. So I came and I moved to Melbourne, and my 25 years in Melbourne began. And I started cooking Sunday feasts. And around 78, about a year or so after Prabhupada passed away, I found myself at our Gopal's vegetarian restaurant. And there's a huge history of restaurants in Australia. I was there in the first one in Melbourne. And we used to cook wonderful, wonderful prasadam and serve it out to people on nice little tables. And people were really enjoying it. And the manager of the restaurant, Brihaspati, he said to me, hey, Kurma, people are loving the food, I think you should do some cooking classes. So I said, okay, let's give it a try. So I started running cooking classes. And at the same time, I was also cooking Sunday feasts at the same time. And I was also doing deity worship. So I was in the deity room in the morning, and then I would go to the restaurant. I would come out of the deity room. Somehow or other, I'd get my rounds chanted, go to the restaurant early, cook for the restaurant, and then once a week do cooking classes as well. So I was able to do many things at once. So I was doing cooking classes, my pujari work, and the whatever the third one was. Restaurant, yeah. There's a bit of dementia setting in here. And so I was able to do all these things. And what was your question? I'm sorry.
The question was, what happened from 1975 to 1990? So you were just giving a history of that.
That's right. And anyway, so the restaurants, we moved to bigger and better premises, and the restaurant was getting packed out with people. I was cooking, very well. I was actually basically inventing large-scale recipes from the small recipes that I sort of had from here and there. And I came to the realization that it was time for me to get a cookbook together. But going back in time a little bit, in 1982, 1983, Nishringananda from ITV got in touch with me, and he said, we want you to do some TV cookery shows. I said, oh, wow, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. He said, you'll have to come to LA. I said, great. So I flew to LA, and we recorded 26 cookery shows for the PBS network, public broadcast system.
Right, that's huge. PBS is big.
It was, I don't know how big it was then, but anyway, it was a sort of a non-commercial sort of venture. I don't exactly know whether there was much money to be made in it, but anyway, that was wonderful. Being in LA was wonderful, and recording the TV shows were wonderful. This was the very first set of shows, which I'm looking quite young in those pictures.
Right. Kind of like.
Yeah, no, way younger.
Way before.
But similar to that.
Okay.
And we recorded those shows, and because they were very successful. And for those shows, I just used Jumuna's recipes because I hadn't done a cookbook yet.
Right.
And so they were all Jumuna's recipes, and they turned out, I mean, the production values were shocking, and it was pretty poor photography, but nevertheless, somehow or other, and they're still out there. You can still see them, and you can still learn to cook from watching them. In our little pretend kitchen there with the pretend windows and pretend stove and an oven that was just pretend, and everything was pretend.
Yeah.
But anyway, it somehow it worked out. And then around a few years later, I thought to myself, I should do my own cookbook. I should get my own cookbook together. So around, I think I've got the dates all correct here, around 1989, I took a leave of absence, a sabbatical, whatever, from the restaurant to work on my cookbook. And I actually never went back to the restaurant after that. But that was after 79 to 80. It was 10 years at Gopal's restaurant, which was wonderful, a wonderful experience. And that's where I got my kitchen experience also. And anyway, I spent 2 years working on my cookbook. The cookbook came out. It was very successful. It's now in its like 15th print run or something. And
which one is that?
That's the Great Vegetarian Dishes.
Oh, okay, yeah, this one.
The one that you showed me. I mean, it's been translated into Hungarian.
Right.
It's been translated into Farsi. This is the language of Iran.
Wow.
It's been translated into Italian. I got this amazing letter once from a lady in Iran. She said, I run a regular cooking program at our house with 15 of my friends, and we're cooking from your book. And the recipes are wonderful. We've all become vegetarians. And this is a Muslim lady. And I was very impressed. And I said, do you all speak and read English? And she said, no, we have your Iranian copy. And I said,
oh my gosh.
What Iranian copy?
You didn't even know.
I didn't even know. And because it was completely bootlegged. So they just did it. They just quietly, copied the pictures and copied the text into Farsi.
Oh gosh.
And I think basically the BBT gave up on suing them after years. But it's out there, and so anyway, it was the cookbook years were spectacular, and that brings us up to so then Nishingananda invited me back to do another series in America. So we did the second 26-part series. And the production values were a bit better. And then and then some years later, I did a third series in Australia. So there were 70-something episodes. And in Australia, that was screened on prime time, nationwide TV at 7 o'clock in the evening, straight after the news. And so it was like so many people saw it.
Wow.
And that was sort of like my... famous years, people would stop me on the street and ask for an autograph and stuff.
Really?
Yeah. I'd be going on the tram, hopping in the tram to get to the restaurant to cook. Yeah. And people would say, hey, Kurma, I loved your show last night.
Wow.
And things like that, So it was sort of fun.
Amazing.
So and then I started doing cookery classes all around Australia and in colleges and cooking schools and then around the world, and it just sort of increased. But there was something else that happened somewhere in that mix. I just took some notes here. What happened? Well, there was cooking classes. There was the TV shows. Yeah. Anyway, so then I started traveling around the world, and I went to Poland and Russia and China and Hong Kong and everywhere, and did cookery classes. And of course, that was fun. It's nice to travel around. And you asked me actually.
You transitioned from staying in the temple and to the restaurant, and now you are traveling and teaching.
So I wasn't really in the temple anymore. I was at the by the time I was traveling around, I'd done a number of other services in the temple at the same time as being head pujari usually. Like I spent some years on Sankirtan. I was very impressed by the Sankirtan revolution. The book distribution revolution in Australia was taking off. The famous Buddhimanta, brother of Keshava, had come to Australia. Tripurari Swami who was a brahmachari at the time, if I'm not
Right.
mistaken, came to Australia, and he just ignited. They both ignited a Sankirtan revolution. I mean, it's like we had book storerooms full to the brim with books. Like we got a shipment of 20,000 nectar of devotions, and we got like 30,000 Krishna book trilogies.
Oh my God.
What are we gonna do with all these books? So, we took a few copies and cut out the pictures and stuck them on the brahmachari wall. And what are we going to do with all these books? And we had no idea. We had no idea what to do with them. And then, of course, Tripurari and Buddhimata came and showed us that you can actually go onto the street and sell books on the street. It was like unheard of. We would just do Back to Godheads. By this stage, I was a Back to Godhead distributor.
Right.
And I remember on Christmas Eve in 1974, I went out in my Devotee and sold 1,000 Back to Godhead magazines in one day.
1,000?
1,000, and I think I held the record at that stage. But it was ecstatic. It was wonderful. I was never very good at distributing big books. I just kept it to Back to Godheads, which I really enjoyed doing. And then the devotees and the Sankirtan devotees, it was like infectious. They were coming back to the temple and they were telling all their Sankirtan stories. And I asked the temple president at the time, I said, I'd really like, could I be excused and could I join the book distribution, hop in one of the vans and just drive somewhere and become a book distributor. So I got the chance. And so they were going to open up a temple in Perth in Western Australia, which is 2,500 kilometers from Sydney. It takes 3 days to drive from Sydney to Perth. And at that stage, there were not even sealed roads. It was just like sandy dirt roads. And so we hopped in the van, and I thought there was me, there was Buddhimanta, there was Chiru, and there was Hari Sori. And I remember having an argument in the back of the van. There was me and Hari Sori sitting with our heads crushed up against the ceiling because there were so many books in the van we could hardly move.
Wow.
And he was saying to me, when we get to Perth, I'm going to be the temple president. So that was our little arrangement. I didn't So we got to Perth and we started distributing books, and it was just magnificent. My job actually was just to go to the van and bring boxes of books to the book distributors and tear them open. And by the time I had made that 2-minute walk from the van to the book distributors, they had emptied the box. So then I ran back to the van with the empty boxes, and then I brought more boxes, and then those boxes were empty, and I spent all morning just bringing boxes, and then they were getting empty. People were lining up with $10 in their hand to buy a Krishna book, and lining up to buy a hardcover Bhagavad Gita, a Macmillan Gita, with $10 in their hand, sometimes $20 to buy one of each. It was just, they'd never seen the devotees there. And I was having a great time. But one day I started to feel a little ill, and I was cooking the Sunday feast, and I sort of like collapsed in the kitchen and found myself asleep in the middle of the floor with the tomato chutney burning on the stove. And I said to Chiru the next day, I said to Hari Sori, I'm not feeling well. I should go to the hospital. And anyway, to cut a long funny story short, I had hepatitis because one of the devotees who had a brahmachari in Sydney Temple, just before the van drove off to go on Harinam Sankirtan, it was just after the Sunday feast, and I was sitting down next to this devotee who had blooped and had just come back from living in a hippie commune, and he shared one of his samosas with me, and he had hepatitis.
Oh my God.
So they put me in quarantine in the hospital for 3 weeks. And I was very ill. It was hepatitis D or something, or A, and one of the less dangerous ones. But I was bright yellow, and I was very weak. And by the time I came out, someone had come from the other side of Australia to replace me, and they said, "I'm sorry, Kurma, I think you're going to have to go back." So that was my Sankirtan sort of adventure cut short by Providence.
Mm.
So anyway,
Yeah, and you mentioned Mother Yamuna. She was the only one who had a cookbook at the time. So what was your experience? Did you ever meet her? Did you ever interact with her?
Well, I met her in 1974. We see many things, but as you know, as a devotee, you have many things going on at once. So not only were all these things going on, we were going to India every year from 1974 for the Mayapur Vrindavan Festival. 1974 was the first year that the Australian devotees went. It was really the first real Mayapur Vrindavan festival. So after the Mayapur event, we went to Vrindavan, and we were staying in Fogala Ashram because there was no Krishna Balaram Mandir built yet. We would have Prabhupada would be speaking at the Fogala Ashram in the evenings, and temple was still under construction. And they would serve prasadam at the Fogala Ashram on the roof. And Yamuna and Guru Das were there at the time. I didn't know who she was. And when I read the memoirs about Yamuna, I realized that that's who I saw at the time and spoke to at the time. Although at the time I didn't know who it was. I basically said, "What time is lunch?" And she said, "Lunch is at 1 o'clock, Prabhu, and be there." And I said, "I will." And that's the only thing I ever said to her.
Wow.
Now later on, and she was organizing the cooking, and it was wonderful. But I never really had any interactions with Jumana, other than borrowing, adapting some of her recipes from my
Really?
slightly plagiarizing them. Just a few.
Wow. Okay, cool.
There's a few. You could say I was inspired by her recipes.
Right.
Now, in 1990 something, I was in Mayapur, and that was the year that Jumuna came to Mayapur, and she wasn't that well at the time, but I could tell it was her coming towards the temple from way in the distance for greeting the deities. And I was thinking, wow, here's Jumuna. I wonder if she's going to chastise me for using some of her recipes. And I especially liked her recipes that were serialized in Back to Godhead magazine. I don't know whether you ever followed the history of Back to Godhead, but Vishaka and Yamuna would publish Yamuna's recipes in the Back to Godhead magazine before they made it to the book. So these were the recipes that I used, not the ones from the book, but the ones that were less edited than the ones that ended up in the cookbook, because she spent many years on the book. So it was those recipes that I used. So it was nothing. I wasn't doing anything illegal, but I was thinking, she was walking and coming towards me, and I was thinking, I wonder if she's gonna. I was in this sort of reverie that she was going to say, "Kurma, you didn't even ask me to use those recipes." And I was thinking, oh, she's going to chastise me. Of course, she wouldn't have done such a thing. Anyway, when she was about 100 yards away from the temple, I looked, and she had turned around because she wasn't feeling well, and she went back to her room where she was staying, and I never saw her again. So my only interaction with Yamuna was asking her what time lunch was. It was food related.
Right, but in later years, you never kind of cross paths or anything.
No.
Very interesting.
Hang on a sec. Can you hear that? Can you turn that off? I'm sorry. The air conditioning's on and it's a bit loud.
Oh, no, it's okay.
I'm sorry. What were you asking?
No, I was saying, so you never cross paths with her again?
No, never. I mean, I was an ardent fan.
Right.
And I studied her big book, from beginning to end, and it was inspirational to me. And when I did my first book, I basically put the book together, the recipes themselves, inspired by the way she did it, with great intricacies, and putting, perhaps even too much detail, but like 1 teaspoon is this many grams or this many mils. So basically, I did it the way she did it, because she was the benchmark of cookbook perfection for me.
Right. And then so we went to like 1990, and then from then onward, what was it like? What were you doing?
Well, I was, because I was also, of course, at the same time, there were all these different layers in my life. I was also married, so
right.
I did the whole marriage life. So I was married, and then I would be traveling, and then I would be at the restaurant, and then I would be in the deity room in the morning, and then I'd be at this cooking the Sunday feast. So it was like many different services at once. I did a few other different services. I was vice president for a while. I was, what else was I doing? I did a whole lot of different services in the temple. Taking out the Harinam parties, That became a big thing because it's one of my favorite services is leading kirtan on the street.
Right. Right. I want to just say my first interaction with you, as I mentioned to you, but for the listeners, someone sent me a recording of you singing Mangalarti, and that became, I listened to that so many times because it was so incredibly beautiful. And I was like, who is it? And they said, it said Kurma Das, and I was like, okay. The only Kurma Das that I ever heard of was the chef. And then I asked this devotee, like, is it the same person? Like, yeah, it's the same person. I was like, oh my goodness, I can't believe it. So for our listeners, if you Google, I think on YouTube there's a few kirtans. Please listen to Prabhu's kirtans. Beautiful kirtans. I love the way it's like kind of like my father-in-law Kripamoy Prabhu also does kirtans like it, and in New Jersey we had a devotee living here, Vishnu Gada Prabhu, who was also a Prabhupada disciple. There's like this older ISKCON style of kirtan that's so like it's like all about dancing and standing and playing mridanga while you sing, and like I love that so much. I really admire all the devotees who do the kirtan like that a lot. Thank you so much for and you said that's one of your favorite services.
I love it, and leading Mangalarti is the most favorite of all my kirtan.
Wow.
That's the best place to be. Recently, a couple of years back, my wife and I, by the way, I haven't introduced my wife, Dira Lalita, to all our.
Go ahead, please, yes.
Come over here, Dira. She's my inspiration and she's my technical support here, just in case something goes wrong, because I haven't got a clue. This is Dira Lalita.
No, we can't exactly. Oh, let me make the screen bigger so we could see her. There we go. Haribol. Hare Krishna Mataji. Nice to see you. Thank you for helping us out technologically here and supporting Prabhu.
So yes, Dira and Lita and I went to Sweden 3 or 4 years back, and we were invited to cook for the BBT meetings.
Okay.
And of course, it was midsummer. It was literally on the special midsummer festival in Sweden. So there was it didn't get dark at night. It was like light all night. So Mangalarti, you get up at 2:30, 3 o'clock, 3:30, whatever. It's light. So it's an unusual experience. Standing in the temple room with the sun blazing through the windows at Mangalarti time. But it was wonderful because it had been quite a few years since I'd been living in the temple. So at the BBT at the temple there in Sweden, not the Almviksgard, but the Korsnäsgard, beautiful deities, and it was nice to be there for Mangalarti again with all the stalwarts. There was Vaisheshika Prabhu and Jayaveda Swami and all the BBT men. It was wonderful, and it's always the highlight of my day if I can actually, because living at home, we don't have Mangalarti at home. We get up, right. we're up, 3 or 4 in the morning, but we don't have a Mangalarti ceremony because there's just 2 of us, and so we just. Right. I remember reading Prabhupada said, if you don't have Mangalarti, at least chant japa. So we're chanting Hare Krishna, but with our bead bags. But but there's nothing to compare to Mangalarti. It's just wonderful.
Wonderful, yes.
And the Melbourne Temple Mangalartis were very, very special to me, and I got a very deep attraction to the deities in Melbourne and to the devotees, and because I spent, as I said, a quarter of a century in that temple. It was a big part of my spiritual life. Half of my spiritual life was spent in that temple.
I remember in the early, I think it was the 2000s, there was this website called Planet ISKCON, and I think you had a blog or something like that where you would show all the places that you were going and teaching. So in the 2000s, that's what you were mostly doing, traveling and doing cooking classes for just secular people, right?
Yeah. Well, I did about 3,500 cookery classes in that period.
Oh my goodness!
Which is a vast amount of classes. I was teaching 3, 4, 5 times a week for years and years and years. In fact, if you go to Kurma.net /blog, you'll find the archives of all of those articles, and they're all still there. And it was just wonderful. I spent 8 years in Western Australia in Perth, so I was cooking at various colleges, various institutions for adult education, summer schools. All this is all with regular people, not with devotees.
Right.
And I would teach in people's homes. That was really the highlight of my cooking life. I would have cooking classes in people's homes. I would advertise myself, like, invite me to your home, invite 10 or 12 or more of your friends, and we're going to cook a big feast together. We'd plan a menu with the hostess. I would give her a shopping list. She'd buy the burger. It might be the other side of Australia. It might be, a few hours train trip away, wherever it was. I would fly there. They would put me up, accommodate me. We'd have the cookery class. All have the hosts and the hostesses' friends would come, extremely enthusiastic, and we'd cook for a whole day and a huge, magnificent feast. There's lots of pictures in my archives.
Mm.
And then we'd sit down and there was a beautiful table with magnificent bowls of delicacies, and people were just blown away. And we'd have a huge feast, and this went on for years and years and years and years and years. And it was spectacular. It was so much fun.
Mm. Did you say kurma.net?
Yeah, kurma.net/blog. I think that's where you'll find them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's arranged in years, and you can just click on there's an index of topics and there's an index of dates, but you can just go open up anything and you'll see various things there. It's
very cool. I'm just on it right now. Wow, very nice. You were talking about the cooking classes. So do you think that's cooking classes are still a good way to like share Krishna consciousness? Like when you did cooking classes, were you also like speaking maybe philosophy or something?
not much philosophy, but I was
Right.
just basically being a devotee in front of them. I mean,
Mm.
I do a little offering. I'd say, now I'm gonna chant some prayers and mantras.
Oh wow.
And I do a little mental offering. I couldn't sort of set up an altar. Most
Right.
of these people, a lot of these people were not even vegetarians, and their friends were not vegetarians. Sometimes all meat eaters, and they were respectful, and they saw that I wasn't drinking. Sometimes I told people don't drink alcohol during the cooking classes. Sometimes they'd
Right.
crack open a bottle of champagne or something at the end. I couldn't really do anything about that, but they saw that I wasn't drinking, and I was sort of like chaste in my behavior. And they
Yes.
would always ask so many questions. So I tell me you're a Hare Krishna. Yeah, I'm a Hare Krishna. And what do you do? And so it was low key preaching. But the main thrust was to engage them in taking prasadam, and it was a way that I could support myself very well,
Wow.
very well. And it's a wonderful thing for devotees to do. Now, of course, at the moment, the world is in a strange place, and you're not going to get invited around to people's houses at this stage.
Yeah.
But this is not going to go on forever, although it probably is going to go on for some years. But if you want to make friends with people and make them take them into your confidence and make them very impressed with Krishna consciousness, go and cook prasadam at their house and share it with them, and it's wonderful. I'm still keeping in touch with some of those people that I cooked, in whose houses I cooked at 10, 20, 30 years ago.
Amazing.
It's wonderful. It was a very special gift from Krishna, and somehow or other I'm always empowered to be able to do it in exactly the time that I was allotted to do it. It's some special, Krishna gives me some special empowerment, and I can do it. I can entertain the guests, crack jokes. I can cook. I can get them to help with the cooking. And there's maybe 5 people each with a pot on a stove somewhere, and I'm supervising it. And then they're cutting that up, and they're cutting that. And I'm doing that, and I'm educating and telling them all sorts of nutritional stories and history. And I'm doing it all at once. And I'm sort of able to sort of keep it all on track.
Mm.
And then finish exactly the right time, and then get it all presented nicely. It's like some special gift from Krishna, but I tried to do it because I knew that's what I had no doubt that this is what Krishna wants me to do for the rest of my life, is to have something to do with cooking.
Mm.
It was made abundantly clear to me, but of course now my life has changed somewhat.
Yeah, I know that you were pujari, for many many years before, and the connection with the pujari room and the kitchen is very, there's a deep connection between those two things as far as like, okay, there's some cleanliness involved. You don't taste anything before. You have to be clean when you go in. So how did you kind of balance when you were teaching people about cooking, but at the same time you were a pujari as well? Like for me, I would be like, okay, don't no don't taste that, or did you pass stool recently or something, like something dumb like that. But like
Well, it's
how would you?
really, yeah, fantastic question. It was very difficult. I remember I did one cooking class, and the lady, I went into the kitchen, and there was carpet in the kitchen,
Oh my
and I thought this is not a good sign. And then in comes the guests are all arriving and everything, and into the kitchen bounds two huge German Shepherd dogs.
oh my gosh.
There was Heidi and Fritzy. And I said, dogs. I said, I'm not sure. And as I was talking, they were sniffing me and licking me and practically headbutting me. They were the biggest dogs I've ever seen. And I said, look, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I can do a cooking class here with these dogs. She said, Heidi, Fritzy, would you like to go outside? I said, no, they don't want to go outside. So, so they joined us for the cooking class.
Mm.
And so that was a cooking class from hell, that one. But normally I told people, look, if you've got cats and dogs, please, and most of the time they wouldn't even think about letting them in the house, while
Right.
the cooking class was going on. But then, of course, people, and I would tell people, look, it's part of our standard that we don't taste anything when we cook, and most of the time they didn't.
That's good.
They would always respect, what you had to say. And as far as there being sushi, there's no question of that.
Right.
But it was just a special. It was like a preaching opportunity. I had to shut down my pujari persona
Right.
and
Right.
just become something else for the time.
Right. Right.
It's what
um
it's what you have to do.
right. So now, like in more recent years, you've been in Ireland.
Yeah, since almost 6 years now.
Tell us a little bit, like, how did you end up there, and what does your life look like now?
Right. Well, I was living in the house that my dad that I grew up in Sydney. Actually, my mother passed away in 2007. And at this time, I was right in the thick of my traveling, and every year or sometimes 2 or 3 times a year, I'd come through because I was living in Western Australia. I would find myself in Sydney, and I would spend some time with my dad and see how he was going. My mother had passed away, and my father's health started to deteriorate. So I thought maybe I should come and live with him and look after him and cook for him. So that's what happened. I moved into my dad's house, and I was cooking for my dad, and he was enjoying Prasadam because my dad had actually met Prabhupada in 1971. He'd done some service for Srila Prabhupada
Wow.
by opening the temple door for him, and Prabhupada smiled at him and nodded. So he'd
Wow.
done some service, and ever since then, doing some service for Prabhupada, he was very appreciative of Srila Prabhupada. He met him a couple of times, and when the Srila Prabhupada Leelamrita came out, written by Satsvarup Das Goswami, my father read it all cover to cover, and he even started chanting japa one round a day for a little period of his life.
Wow.
So anyway, I was living in my dad's house, but then my dad's health deteriorated, and it came to the point with my sister and myself. I have two sisters, and we all migrated to Australia when I was 12 because I was
Right.
living in England. I missed out that part of the story.
Hmm.
So my sister and the elder of my two sisters and I conferred, and we thought, I don't think it's possible for my dad to live here anymore. It's too difficult to look after him. So we put him in a nursing home, and then I was living in the house, but the it got too expensive to pay for his nursing home bills, so it was time to sell the house. My dad wasn't going to move back in the house, so then I was thinking, okay, now at this stage I was married to Dira Lalita, and we thought, okay, where are we going to live? And we were looking at all different places. We looked at New Zealand, we looked at Melbourne, we looked at Brazil, England, and we're looking at and even Hong Kong. None of these things sort of developed, and we were seriously thinking about living in England because I was offered a job to cook for the Krishna Jayanti. What's it called?
Krishna
Avanti.
Avanti. Right.
Avanti school, to run the kitchen. So that
Oh,
was
wow.
looking like that may happen. But then we looked at the logistics of it all and how much work was involved, and it was looking pretty much like too much for me. And for various reasons, we didn't end up in England. And but sometime in the past, before then, about 5 or 6 years or so before, in one of my world cooking tours, I'd been in Ireland, and I did cooking classes in Ireland in 2003. And the idea of moving to Ireland appealed to me, and I knew some devotees there, and one thing led to another, and Krishna basically shone a light on that particular choice. This is where you should be. We were praying to Krishna, where are we going to live? Are we going to live somewhere in Australia? Are we going to be a bit more adventurous? And so it all happened that it so happened that we ended up living in Ireland. And people say, because there's a lot of Irish people living in Australia, and they move there because the weather here is so shite, as they say in Ireland. And they all just go and live in Australia because it's nice and sunny. And people say to me, "What are you doing living in Ireland? It's terrible weather." And I said, "But we wanted a sea change," which we did, and it worked out well. And it's just it's at this point in time, it's working for us. It's a different lifestyle. I'm doing my deity worship every day. We have our Shalagram Shila and Govardhan Shila's worships are being worshipped. All my spiritual desires have always been fulfilled. So I was thinking, I was desiring to worship Tulsi. And when we got here to Ireland, some devotees had some Tulsi plants, and they said, we would like to give you some little Tulsi. So we started working with Tulsi. We used to have, like, for instance, I used to have a picture of Govardhan Hill on the altar. And I would always, during the puja, I was looking at Govardhan Hill and I was thinking, wouldn't it be nice to worship a Giriraj Govardhan Shila? And then I remember one day praying to Govardhan Hill, if you think it's appropriate, please come. And then about a week later, I got an email from Jaitirtha Charan, who's a Pujari.
Oh, yes, I know him. Yeah, amazing devotee.
And he said, my son just came back from Vrindavan, and he's brought back a Govardhan Shila that one senior devotee gave him. Would you like one? And I thought, oh my goodness, Krishna's coming. And he said, by the way, he said, I'd like to send you a Kurma shalagram as well.
Wow.
So it's a beautiful, beautiful shalagram. Prabhupada's father worshipped Kurma shalagram.
Right. Wow.
Prabhupada recalls that his father used to keep the Kurma shalagram in a handkerchief, and he used to tie it around his neck, and he wouldn't do anything without having the Kurma shalagram with him.
Amazing.
So anyway, my desires have always been fulfilled, and so I'm worshipping. And when I married Dira Lalita, she came with Shalagram Shilas. It was the part of the package deal.
Wonderful.
Because she was worshipping Shalagram Shila.
Okay.
And anyway, there's some amazing stories there. But
yeah.
So Shalagram Shila came, Govardhan Shila came, Tulsi's come, and so I have to be careful what spiritual desires I have because they all get fulfilled.
Amazing.
And I've always had an attraction towards gardening because my father, when I was very young, he would grow fruits and vegetables, and I used to watch him. And so in Sydney, I started to grow fruits and vegetables and herbs in my dad's garden and it was early 2000s. And when I came here to Ireland, I continued, and so I'm growing fruits, and I especially like to grow flowers to worship the deities, fragrant flowers, and whatever else I can grow in the garden. So it's become a very big part of my life, also gardening and growing fruits and vegetables to offer to Krishna. So and there's nice devotees here in Ireland, and we up until the recent crisis with the lockdowns and everything, we were having regular sanghas. And so I was so I regularly arrange get-togethers with 30 or 40 or 50 devotees from around Ireland. And the arrangement is that everybody cooks one preparation, offers it, and brings it along. So we would have these
Wow.
spectacular prasadams with 30 or 40 dishes.
Wow.
Another aspect of my life is that I've always been interested in reuniting Prabhupada's disciples or Prabhupada's grand disciples. Because in 1992, I arranged the first Prabhupada disciple reunion of Australian.
Was it on a boat or something?
No, that was a later one.
Oh, okay,
That
cool.
was 2011. That was the third one. We did three. So the first one we did in Melbourne Temple, and devotees from all around the world, devotees, Churu and Vaibhavi, they didn't come to the first one, but I think they came to the third one.
Yeah.
And Upendra came before he passed away, and Madhuvisa, and stalwart devotees came to that reunion, and it was magnificent. We had so many devotees that were living in Australia, Prabhupada's disciples, and ones that had already moved somewhere else, and it was a huge job, but it was a wonderful experience. And at that reunion, we were all talking and reminiscing about the old days, and someone said, someone should write all this down. Someone should write all this down. And I thought to myself, yeah, maybe that's what I should do. So then I decided I was going to write a book, and I was going to go and find all the devotees that were living in Australia, not only Australians, but devotees who traveled with Prabhupada, like Shama Sundar and Shruti Kirti and Nanda Kumar, and all these devotees, and Bali Madan and Vegavan, and all the devotees that were Prabhupada's secretaries and servants, and Pushta Krishna Swami. So I presented this idea to devotees, and they said, yes, it's a great idea. I said, I need finance. So they arranged a Prabhupada, a special fund. And I traveled and interviewed devotees for 5 years, from 1994 to 1999.
On top of what you were already doing.
And I traveled around the world, and I met all these wonderful devotees and spent time with them and interviewed, and we had 800 hours of interviews. And then all of these interviews were distilled down into my book. And I've always had this passion about keeping Prabhupada's devotees within our bosom, not letting them just fall away.
Right.
And so when I came to Ireland, I just thought to myself, because Ireland's a bit of a country where devotees tend to be very separate from each other. It's part of the Irish mentality. They're sort of a fiery bunch. So I decided it'd be nice to get devotees back together. Sometimes devotees have been coming that haven't been with the devotees for decades, and they're coming back.
Right.
So it's a very rewarding service.
Wow. Is Duryodhana Guru near you? Duryodhana Guru?
Yes, Duryodhana Guru he's living in the same county as myself.
Oh, wow. This is a beautiful countryside area.
It's beautiful, yeah, County Wicklow. It's called the sunny southeast. I think the word sunny is in inverted commas, but it's supposed to be sunnier than the rest. It's often snowing in other parts of Ireland, but it isn't snowing here. So that's I guess that's a concession.
So
he's not living very far away.
For our listeners, so you wrote this book, The Great Transcendental Adventure, it's called.
Yeah, here it is.
Please. My father read it. I read parts of it. Beautiful.
Where are we? Here we are.
Yeah, right there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really is. I mean, a couple of devotees told me at the time that Dhananjaya Prabhu told me it was the best Prabhupada memories book that he'd ever read. I felt myself empowered by Krishna to write this book. I can only say,
wow.
I don't know how I did it, but I felt like Krishna was arranging me to write this book as a way of glorifying his great devotee, Srila Prabhupada. And it was a lot of fun. I tend to be very diligent in whatever I do, so I put a lot of effort into it, and it took me 5 years.
Right.
And but it's a great book, and I like to read it myself.
This is a story of someone gave Prabhupada some puris or something, and he said, "Who has made these?" And it was you who had made them. Can you tell that story?
It was me. Yeah, the story has got a little bit adapted
like a lot of stories of Prabhupada, right?
It's amazing how they've embellished the story. But the story on the street is that Prabhupada called me into his room, and he said he looked at the puris and he said, and he picked one and he put his finger in it, and the finger went through, and it was like big and puffed, and steam came out. I mean, I've even heard a version from some Russian devotees. The Russian devotees really like to. Anyway, I won't go into that. So there was steam coming out, and Prabhupada said, "This is the best puri. I like things cooked nicely. Thank you very much." Yeah. So that's the story on the street. But that's the urban myth story. But the actual story was that this was at the time when Prabhupada was visiting Sydney Temple in 1973. I was the pujari there, and I was cooking. I don't know. It seemed like I was cooking and doing deity worship all day and night. It was time for Prabhupada to go and speak at the Sydney Town Hall, which turned out to be a very big event. There were 2,000 people attending, and of course, the transcripts of all those events are in the archives. The lecture was recorded, of course. Anyway, Prabhupada went to that event. It was very successful. I was alone at the temple, staying behind to cook the offering and do the evening arati, and then the next offering and the next arati. And I cooked an eggplants and tomatoes, cauliflower and potatoes, and some other nice recipe. I was getting quite good at cooking by then, and my puris were pretty good. I used to make puris that did actually puff up and stay puffed up, not the ones that they sort of like when you're in India or some places and they make all the puris and they throw them all into a basket and they're all compressed like tires. And they have to peel them apart, and they're all sort of flappy.
I'm laughing because that's so my experience. Oh my gosh!
I remember once, I think it was Prabhupada actually said, they offered it some place, and Prabhupada picked it up, and he flapped it, and he said, "This is puri." At least that could be another one of those Prabhupada stories. But anyway. No, my puris were all individual. They were dry. They were crisp. They stayed puffed up. You took them off the plate and put them on the. I mean, I just figured it out. A lot of my cooking was self-taught as well. You just got to follow the recipe. People say, how do I become a good cook? I say, just follow the recipes. All you got to do is follow the recipes. But still, some people can't follow recipes. They get my recipe. I got a friend who. He said, "I'm going to cook this from your book." I said, "Great, it's a fabulous recipe. Go ahead." And then he served it, and it was nothing like the recipe. And I said, "What happened?" He said, "Well, I followed the recipe, except I used caraway instead of cumin, and I didn't use wheat flour. I used rice flour, and I didn't put sugar in. I put honey in, and I didn't use, But apart from that, it's your recipe. Some people are just they can't help themselves." Right. But anyway, I made the puris, and they were nice puris, and then I went and I was doing. I went into the deity room, I offered the plate, and then I came out, and 15 minutes later, I went back in, took the plate off the altar, put it on the kitchen table, went back into the deity room, and I was doing arati. So anyway, Prabhupada came back from the town hall, and he was feeling hungry, because Prabhupada would often feel hungry, especially in cold climates. It was winter in Sydney. It was a cool night. It was not icy cold, but it was a cool night. And Prabhupada, when he preached, he'd get an appetite. He was very enlivened, and he hadn't eaten since 12. So it was like 9 hours later.
Oh wow!
And he was, so he was hungry. So as often was the case, he would say to his secretary or servant, "Is there any prasadam?" And so Shruti Kitty came down to the kitchen, and there was the Mahaprasadam sitting on the deity bench. So he got the prasadam, gathered it together, and brought it into Prabhupada's room. But before Prabhupada, while this was going on, Prabhupada actually came into the temple room while I was offering the arati, and I was doing the arati and singing at the same time because there was no one else there.
Right.
And in those days, the way it was done is that there had to be some sort of kirtan going on while there was arati going on. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we got around it by playing a tape of Prabhupada singing Krishna meditations or something, but never just doing the arati in complete silence. So somehow or other, I think that was the standard that we had. I was singing at the top of my lungs. I was actually pretty ecstatic. And I was singing, and Prabhupada came right in the temple room, And he was standing right behind me, looking at Radha Gopinath, beautiful Radha Gopinath. And did you ever visit Sydney Temple, Prabhu?
I did, yes.
Yeah, Radha Gopinath, beautiful. They were installed in 1971. This is their 50th anniversary coming up.
Wow.
April the 10th, 1971, which is just a few weeks away. It's also my 50th anniversary of moving in the temple coming up. So time really flies. But anyway, Prabhupada was standing right behind me, and I didn't know he was there. And I didn't know until the next day when Bhagavan, who was with the entourage, said, Prabhupada was standing right behind you in while you were doing arati. And I said, really? Because by the time after offering the lamp, I turned around, Prabhupada had left the temple room.
Right.
And Prabhupada said to Bhagavan, who is that? And he said, that's Kormadas. And he said, oh, he said, Kormadeva. So he sort of gave me a nickname.
Wow.
I don't know, perhaps he liked my singing or whatever. So anyway, so then he took prasadam, and I didn't know, I don't know if I figured out where the prasadam had gone. I think now that I might have thought that someone had come in and just stolen it all. But I don't know. That's all gone from my memory. But next day, Shruti Kirti came up to me and he said, Prabhupada really liked your puris. I said, oh, really? He said, yeah. He said he ate quite a bit of sabji and he ate quite a few of your puris. And he said, whoever's cooked these puris, he is following the principles. Well, so the story goes, the story on the street is, whoever cooked these puris is following the regulative principles. But I don't think that's what Prabhupada said. I think Prabhupada was saying that he's following the principle of cooking. He knows how to do it properly. He's following the prescribed method of making puris.
Right.
I really think that's what Prabhupada was saying. But anyway, the story got garbled. So yeah, Prabhupada really liked the puris, and he told Shruti Kirti to learn from me how to make puris. I said, really? He said, yeah. Prabhupada said, you learn to cook puris like this.
Wow.
So next day I went in the kitchen and I showed him how I make puris, which is pretty straightforward, just ghee, flour, salt, and I cooked them. What happened was that Prabhupada. What was happening was Prabhupada was traveling to Hawaii the next day.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, he showed Shruti Kirti how to cook them, and then the next day, I showed him how to cook them. And the next day, Prabhupada was leaving for Hawaii, flying to Honolulu on the next leg of his tour. And Prabhupada said told Shruti Kirti to make some puris and sabji for the trip. Prabhupada would never go anywhere on the plane without bringing prasadam. Right. So I made an eggplant and potato sabji with asafoetida and cumin and turmeric and salt and ground coriander and puris. And Prabhupada took them on the plane with him. That was the only time I cooked for Prabhupada.
Amazing. Wow.
So it was nice.
Fantastic. So one thing is to our listeners, I'm going to go through the comments. I see like tons of comments coming with questions. Keep your comments and questions succinct so I can put them on the screen for Prabhu to read and for the rest of our listeners and watchers to look at. But I want to go into our next thing, which I have a sound effect for. Food controversies. Food controversies. Let's start, Prabhu, with masoor dal. What is the deal with masoor dal? Why is it considered like when it said it's I think someone wrote Prabhupada said it has like the same kind of protein as meat, but it's not meat.
It isn't meat. Prabhupada said it is like eating meat.
It is like eating meat.
Yes. Now I'm just thinking, is that the exact words? I tell you why, because I did there was a Facebook page that I did about masoor dal, and it, you know how it grew, and there was like 100 comments. Yes. And one person I took very seriously. He said, my dad told me that Prabhupada told him that red lentils, masoor dal, is like eating meat. And he quoted his dad, who Prabhupada had told. So I thought that was pretty authoritative.
Right.
Because I'd heard that a number of places. Now, it's an unusual thing because, okay, they say that urad dal, some people say that urad dal has, similar protein content to masoor dal. And urad dal was Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's favorite dal, but he was a lifelong celibate.
Right.
And so, it's not like dal is disturbing. But Masoor dal apparently is not good for brahmacharis because it overheats the body, and
Right.
it gives the tendency is for the body to discharge semen
Mm.
without being wanted,
Right.
and involuntarily. So that is the effect of Masoor dal. So that is the main. Sometimes the details are not given, but that's the actual reason. And why Masoor dal and why not other dals, I can't exactly say. But Masoor dal. But then also, Prabhupada mentions lentils. Lentils. So
Right.
it appears that brown, and I've had this discussion with my publisher for the Great Vegetarian Dishes, because I have a recipe in there for brown lentil soup and brown
Oh yeah,
lentil
I love that one.
with shepherd's pie. And I said, and I wanted to put a Masoor recipe in there, and the publisher said, he said, you can't publish a recipe with Masoor dal. Prabhupada said, we're not allowed to eat Masoor dal. And I said, but I said, not everyone that's reading this book is a devotee. He said, no, I don't want you to do it. I said, well, what about the brown lentils? What's the difference? Brown lentils? He said, there is a difference. I said,
Right.
all right, okay, well, fine. It's fine with me because I didn't want to have to cut all these recipes out. But then other places I've read where it says that lentils are included in the food category that shouldn't be eaten, because there's pink lentils, but there's also French puy lentils, there's French black lentils. There's actually 15, 20 different varieties of lentils from various countries around the world,
Right.
all quite different. And I really can't tell the difference between Masoor dal and all of those lentils. The only thing is that those other lentils apparently are not mentioned by name or banned.
Right.
But I can say for sure that Masoor dal, Prabhupada recommended that it definitely should not be cooked by Vaishnavas. And you'll find that there are many Vaishnava kitchens around India that will not touch them.
Right.
So that's an easy one to answer because it's pretty black and in one sense because it's black and white.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
don't eat Masoor dal. Now, then the question expands, and because in ISKCON now you have, there's restaurants, there's people cooking at home, eating at home, there's sanghas where people cook and share prasadam. There's actual temples where there's installed deities, Radha and Krishna, and there is somewhat of a different standard of cooking in those places. I mean, if you're cooking at home for the wife and kids, it's different to cooking in the temple where there's installed deities and shalagrams and things like that. And so that's the preface for all the other things that you're going to be asking me about, like
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Well, the next thing
tofu,
was
yeast, and soybeans, and so the list goes on.
right.
But I won't interrupt.
No. I know mushrooms. There's a letter where Prabhupada says it's okay, but it's in kind of the mode of ignorance because it's the way it's grown.
Yeah, actually, Prabhupada said there is no harm in them in
Right.
one letter. But then
Right,
there's another letter. There's another letter where Prabhupada's a little less lenient. So that's the one you were referring to. So the thing is, when you use letters as a reference point,
Yes.
when you use letters for a reference point, it's not foolproof. Because Prabhupada, when he wrote letters, he would write to a specific person.
Exactly.
And in the early days, when Prabhupada sent a letter, it would be put up on the notice board, and it was like everyone can read this letter because it's a letter from Prabhupada, and it was wonderful and innocent, and it was nice.
Yeah.
But then, there were times since then where Prabhupada said, "Look, this was a letter to you. This was not a letter to everyone." Or he would say, "I didn't want you to publish the contents of this letter because this is confidential. This is to the person that I'm writing the letter to." That's why the Prabhupada letter, compendium of Prabhupada's letters. Some people say that it shouldn't have been ever done because some of those letters were confidential. There's a lot to learn from the book, and there's some wonderful things, but there are some things that actually Prabhupada would not have wanted to be public information, because Prabhupada wrote to specific people, specific issues. Some of them had problems, and Prabhupada gave them advice, and it was confidential.
Yeah. What about
the same thing with letters and food? Because to some devotees, Prabhupada would say it's strictly forbidden, and some other devotees he would say there's no harm in it.
Mm.
Mushrooms seem to be in that category that there is no harm in them.
Yeah.
And then there's a story which I heard lately, may be somewhat fiddled with or adjusted somewhat, and it's a little embarrassing because I made it sort of like a big post that Prabhupada said that Lord Chaitanya, when he was in Jarikanda, he took mushrooms because,
Really? I never heard that.
yeah, because, and I heard this via Malati.
Wow.
And but then lately I heard some other story, and I thought that perhaps there were two stories that had got mixed up, and someone got their timelines mixed up, and I don't want to pursue that one. But I do know that the story is going around that Prabhupada, that Lord Chaitanya when he was in Jarikanda and he had the Bhattacharya, Brahmachari assistant, they
Yeah.
would eat roots and fruits and whatever they could find in the forest. And so the story goes that he took some mushrooms also.
Mm.
And apparently Prabhupada said that. But where Prabhupada said that, I don't know. Now, the story about the mushrooms in the French farm seems to be true. But then lately I've been hearing some stories that perhaps the time when Bhagawan was in charge of the French farm and the time that Prabhupada visited the French farm, which was before,
Yeah.
that there were two mushroom stories and they became conflated. So now, I mean, if you had asked me that question 2 weeks ago, I would have given you a different answer. But
Interesting.
sometimes you just can't be sure whether
Yeah.
a story is true, especially if it comes from from word of mouth or from a letter. So the bottom line really is, did Prabhupada say it? Do you have a recording of him saying it on tape?
Yeah.
Do you have a reputable source where there was a witness where Prabhupada said it to someone else? Like when I interviewed for my book, Prabhupada in Australia, people told me these amazing, fantastical stories. And I said, I can't publish this story because no one was there to verify. I mean, I almost published a story. Prabhupada said, this devotee called Mahajan, he said to me, and not an Australian Mahajan, he said to me, I was standing guard outside Prabhupada's room one day, and Prabhupada came out of his room, and he was feeling cold, and he said, "Can I borrow your sweater?" And then I thought, okay. And Mahajan gave him his sweater, and Prabhupada said, "Thank you very much," and he put on the sweater, and he had it on for the rest of the day. I thought, that's an amazing story. I said, was anyone else there? He said, no, it was just me. And then he got back to me later in the day. He said, "Oh, sorry, Prabhu, it was a dream."
Oh my God. Gosh, that scares me a little because how many things that we do and say right now in our movement in 2021 comes from like, Prabhupada said this.
A dream.
Yeah, but it was a dream or something, Anyways,
You've got to verify. That's why I had to.
Yeah.
I had to delete many stories that I and not include them in my book because there was no witness.
Right.
There were some amazing things where I found devotees that had witnessed it, and there were stories that were so fantastical that I didn't want to put them in the book, but only because there were such credible witnesses that I did put them in.
Yeah.
So that's the other side of the story. And but when it comes to food, and like for instance, the story goes that Srila Prabhupada told Hridayananda Das Goswami that soybeans are not suitable for consumption.
Right.
And Hridayananda Maharaj swears that that's what Prabhupada told him. There wasn't anyone else there at the time, or that they recall. But that is a story that we should not use soy products. So that's a big one.
Yeah.
But that's the only reference that I have. So things like soy sauce and tofu and tempeh and the list goes on.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
So what to
Interesting.
do?
That's an interesting part of it. The way I look at it is someone told me like the hierarchy of like pramana, like books are always first,
Yes.
and then there's like lectures, and then there's something else, and there's letters. Letters is also all the way at the end for the reason you said, that it's for a specific person, and he's writing for that person, not for everyone to read. So if it's in a book, then I take it as like, that's the pramana. But there's some things that are not written in the book that like he's not going to write, oh, mushrooms are okay. Anyways, funny thing to talk about.
You key in soybeans on the Veda base, and you can't. There's nothing, so you can't.
Right.
Anyway, so yes, any more questions out there?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions. Let's look at the comment section here. So if you have any questions, put them in the comment section. We'll start taking them. Okay, there's some really big long comments which I can't completely post up here, but it's going to cover your face for a second. Studies have shown among vegetarians around the world, people from India, the only group of vegetarians who have the same level risk heart disease as those Indians who eat meat. They were trying to figure out why that was the case, and they concluded it was due to oil consumption and sedentary lifestyles. We need to get rid of the oil culture so that we don't see so many devotees leaving their bodies at 50, 60 years old. I guess that's a comment from
thanks,
Nityananda Chandra.
That's
Yeah.
comment.
It basically probably was talking at the time when we were talking about ghee.
I mean, ghee is is another big topic. You know.
Right. Okay, we have a lot of comments saying, beautiful conversation, very nice. Okay, what other projects are Kurma Prabhu is working on at the moment? I love his book. So you said you were, yeah, go ahead. Take that.
The Big Cook's Cookbook, for want of a better title.
Right.
I mean, big cooks, but meaning not their body shape, but the fact that they're cooking big amounts. But both could apply to me. So the Big Cook's Cookbook is something that I'd love to put together. I mean, it's 3/4 done, but get it from this stage to the final stage is difficult. I've also got plans to get my Great Transcendental Adventure as an audio book.
That's cool.
What other plans do I have? A few things on the back burner, so to speak.
Nice. Very nice. Joan Morris says, any comments on favorite herbs for health?
Well, they've all got health properties. I mean, there's nothing in the herb world that it doesn't have a healthy use. My favorites are, like fresh coriander, fresh parsley, especially because they grow so easily, and I can grow them and go out. I can just walk out into the garden. Thyme, rosemary. If you want to grow herbs that'll always be there for you and are very medicinal and very delicious, plant some thyme, plant rosemary, plant parsley, because this is planting, but if you're buying them, there's another thing, it's easy. But if you're planting them, they'll always be there. You'll never get rid of them. And bay leaves, I've got a bay leaf trees outside my door that have been there for 5 years and will be there forever. And what was the other thing I was thinking of the other day? Parsley. They're easy to grow and they're always medicinal. So
right, great.
Yes, so many nice things.
Someone is just saying this so beautiful, him acknowledging his dear wife, a true Vaishnava and gentleman. This is at the time when we were introducing Mataji. That's very nice. Hare Krishna Prabhu, if you could ask Kurma, did he ever get a chance to cook for Prabhupada? You heard the story just now.
That's
so some of these comments are from earlier.
That's my next door neighbor, Terry.
Right.
Terry.
Oh, really? Oh, cool. Okay. Where can we buy this book? I assume you're talking about any of your books. Where can we get them?
Cookbooks, you just go to Amazon or you go to your local Hare Krishna book shop, book table. If you're in Europe, you can go to the BLS, Bhaktivedanta Library Services.
Okay.
If you're in India, there's sources of books there. Australia, Australian BBT. And for the Great Transcendental Adventure, Australian BBT, it's almost out of print. The other project that I've got happening is a reprint of this because it's literally almost out of print.
Wow.
If you want to know where to order a copy of the Great Transcendental Adventure, which is a fabulous read, it's kurmadasa@gmail.com, KURMADASA, all lowercase, kurmadasa@gmail.com. Write me a letter and I'll give you the address of the Sydney BBT and who to write to. There is limited copies left.
On the screen here, kurmadasa@gmail.com, like that?
Yep.
Very good.
Yeah.
Okay, let's look at the other questions. Okay, here, this is cool. I wanted to know this as well. What is your favorite recipe or dish to eat? Tell us a little bit about something you personally like to eat or cook.
Thank you, Gene. I sort of expected this question.
Yeah.
This is always part of the questions. What's my favorite? And it's, I would love to give you an immediate recipe, but I actually don't really have any favorites. I have many recipes that I love.
Yeah.
It's like, it's like someone asking you, hey, I hear you've got like 5 children. What's your favorite?
Right. Who's your favorite?
Who's your favorite child? I mean, like it's
Right.
like me asking you, which of your sons do you like more?
Right. Right.
So it's hard to answer. I mean, as far as recipes from my book that I think are just like unlimitedly adaptable and useful and nutritious and wonderful, it would have to be khichdi.
Khichdi, yeah. Nice.
Because there's hundreds and hundreds of ways of making khichdi with any different types of dals, different types of rices, different spices, different vegetables, wet, dry. I would have to say that out of all the recipes in my book, that one is always the one that sticks in people's minds. They say, I grew up, my mum used to cook khichdi out of your book for me, and I
Right.
So I was, and khichdi is so important that even though I did 4 books, but the three main books, cookbooks, and they've all got a different recipe for khichdi in them because khichdi is so important. So I'd probably have to say khichdi would be my favorite.
Nice. I'm going to give my favorite, even though no one asked.
What is your favorite?
I like, I like a ton of things, but I like the Meat Lover's Delight sabji. I love that a lot. Like, oh my God, it's so good. Eggplant, I love eggplant. I like a lot of chutneys. Like I'm looking at pineapple chutney, radha red chutney. I love those chutneys. I like it when it's like sweet, but then really spicy also.
Too hot to bear, too sweet to resist.
Exactly. Yeah. Anyway, we can go on and on about what I like, but let's look at the other questions here. Okay, here's one from Kirtan Premi. I heard a story of chocolate sundae offered to Radha Ras Bihari in Juhu. Is that true?
Oh, yes.
You know anything about that?
Yeah. And, Prabhupada did say when he was in India that you can buy sweets from the sweet shop and offer them directly on the altar for the Mangalarti sweets. And that rule still applies. I dare say there are devotees cooking milk sweets for the deities. But Prabhupada said it's fine. You can purchase sweets straight from the sweet shop and offer them to the deities in India. But that's the only. I mean, he didn't give that rule. He didn't give that instruction anywhere else, I don't think.
Right.
I have heard, yes, chocolate sandesh. I have heard that was one of the items.
Wow.
But the other thing is with chocolate is that.
Wait, hold on, I need a sound effect for that.
Oh yes,
chocolate. We're talking about chocolate, everyone. Everyone, listen up.
Oh my God. You need to play the music from the Twilight Zone or something. This is a whole nother discussion.
I know. In short, let's talk in short. We're coming up to a time now.
Prabhupada gave different instructions, but
yes,
the predominance. And the thing is, with Prabhupada's instructions, it's always best to look at them in chronological order. Because you see, sometimes Prabhupada was informed about a particular thing by some devotees, and then he found out that the devotees had misinformed him. And so he changed the instruction because he was given an update. Somewhere along the line, Prabhupada found out that chocolate contains caffeine and it's a stimulant. And there are written instructions where it is not to be taken. And Hari Sauri's diary, he mentions at a time when they were making hot chocolate at one of the Prasadam booths. And Prabhupada heard about it and he basically pulled the rug out from under that event because he said, no, devotees can't take chocolate milk, hot chocolate, because it contains cocoa, cacao, whatever, and it's a stimulant. So whereas perhaps earlier Prabhupada had given us slightly different instructions. So once again, it's anecdotal evidence, and with anecdotal evidence, it doesn't always match the reality. Now it seems though that Prabhupada was not so much in favor of chocolate, and then there's stories where people, like for instance, the famous story of Indrajumna Swami,
yes,
where he gave Prabhupada 2 varieties of Swiss chocolate, and Prabhupada tasted them both, and he said he liked them.
Amazing.
And that happened.
Yeah.
And so it's endless.
Yeah.
What to do?
I think the bottom line is that you can't get too caught up in, I mean, of course I'm saying you can't get too caught up in it, but also you can't be too frivolous about it either. So there's like a balance that needs to be had, I would say.
There needs to be a balance, and it's very difficult to give definitive answers.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, basically, you have to find out all the information about chocolate that you can, then come to your own decision. But the bottom line is really that Prabhupada was not that in favor of chocolate, in varying degrees
Yeah.
of not in favor, of extremely not in favor, or sometimes not in favor. But not it's not something that Prabhupada would make a habit of eating. That's for sure.
Right. From Nitai Gauranga Sri Hari, PhD, Doctor. Prabhu, what's the story with garlic and onions and their potential medicinal benefits?
Okay, that's a good way of presenting the question. I mean, I've written some very, very lengthy and authoritative and well-researched information on Facebook about onions and garlic. If you look up Kurma Das garlic on your Facebook search, you'll find some really good articles. One big article that I spent a long time researching. That'd be the easiest way to get a hold of it. If you're not on Facebook, I'm not sure, but I can certainly send it to you on some other way. Now he's specifically asking about the so-called health benefits of garlic and onions. This will be benefits that people who are in favor of eating garlic and onions would say to you but it's worth it to eat garlic and onions because they have some benefits. But
Right.
the bottom line, from what I can understand, is the what's the word? What's the opposite of benefit? Here is the wordsmith here. What's the opposite of benefit? Anyway, the things that are good about garlic and onions are outweighed by the things that aren't good about them.
I see.
The disadvantages.
Right.
Garlic and onions have all sorts of health hazards. There's all sorts of health problems with garlic and onions. That article that I'm directing you to gives all the great details. In traditional Chinese medicine, not appreciated, etc., etc. It's pretty. There are no Vishnu temples in India where garlic and onions are offered.
Yeah.
And as in Masoor dal, they're not. Masoor dal is not on the menu in any Vaishnava temple, nor is onion or garlic, or leeks or shallots. And there is the article there. I think there's a
lengthy article for Nitai Gauranga Sri Hari Das.
There's a later one. There's a later one on Facebook which has got more detail.
Right. More detail. Awesome. All right, let's get more questions here. This is interesting. I have a comment at the top how devotees would cook for Srila Prabhupada. Would they ever just offer it to him directly? Interesting question.
Yes, most definitely.
Without offering it to Krishna?
Of course.
Right.
They would never offer it to Krishna first. They would offer it to Prabhupada because it was like the mood was Sakshat Daritvena Samasta Shastra, that this is Krishna's representative. This is non-different to having Krishna here right in front of me. I'm offering Prabhupada this plate of food stuff and he's eating it. And Prabhupada would never say things like, well, is it offered? Of course, some devotees ask that. They say, well, did you offer it? What do you mean, did I offer it? Yes, I offered it to Prabhupada. And he ate it. Mm-hmm. So that's how it was done.
Wonderful.
That's how it was done. We would just offer it to Prabhupada and he would accept it on behalf of Krishna.
Very nice. Chia seeds during Ekadashi, yes or no? Other ways to get creative during Ekadashi. Ekadashi is another one of those.
Yeah, great questions. Oh, right. You're going to have a few Ekadashi memes coming out.
I was so chuffed that you like my memes.
They were the best.
It made my life, actually.
They were fantastic. Chia seeds. I don't think chia seeds break Ekadashi, but I'll have to look it up.
Okay. It's a seed, right? So, what's your like attitude towards Ekadashi? Some people say, Prabhupada said no grains, no beans. We're going to strictly follow to that grains and beans prescription. Yeah. Okay, so that means we can have Ekadashi pizza because we're going to use this kind of flour that doesn't have any grains in it, and like.
Yeah, well, that's okay, but then you've got another sort of strange strand of events is that you've got other Gaudiyas who follow Ekadashis, and they say you're eating tomatoes
or carrots or something, right?
You're eating tomatoes. You don't need, and then you have these Prasadarians and these other Facebook pages where people ask people, like people who are not devotees, practicing devotees, but especially members of the Indian community, who say, "What shouldn't I eat today?" Because it's a Ekadasi, and then you've got all these answers. Some of them are coming from this mutt and this other mutt and other
Right.
various Vaishnava groups, and then you have other Vaishnava groups from India who are not Gaudiya Vaishnavas, but they're other Vaishnavas, and they all follow Ekadasi differently.
Yes.
And you'll go mad if you try to put them all together.
Yes.
So basically, I advise people, who say, no, 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 no eggplants on Ekadasi. And I say, look, Prabhupada took eggplants on Ekadasi. Prabhupada took cumin seeds. He ate tomatoes. We just, as followers of Srila Prabhupada, we eat what Srila Prabhupada ate.
Right.
And if you want to follow Ekadasi like your mother or your grandmother showed you, then do it. But it's not that may not be everyone's standard. And
Right.
because we're following Prabhupada, you may be following your grandmother's standard, but we're following Prabhupada, and Prabhupada, this is how he observed Ekadasi. And it was very simple. And here's another interesting thing: this whole thing about breaking Ekadasi before 7:52. And
I think I got it into with you on Facebook maybe once. Anyway, go ahead.
In Krishna Balaram Mandir, I remember lining up one day, and there was like 3 minutes and 50 seconds that you had to break your Ekadasi. And so they, we were lining up for Charanamrita, and as we were lining up for Charanamrita, there was someone there with a bowl of cold halva and a bowl of cold sweet rice, and they were slapping this cold grains in your hands. Quickly, eat it, quickly, you've only got to. Prabhupada never followed anything like that at all. He would have breakfast the day after Ekadasi, and he would eat grains. Right. He would, this whole Ekadasi Purana, this whole thing about the time to break, that's something that's come from other Vaishnava mutts, and it is not, and there's a long history behind it. And I'm not discrediting any of the devotees that have done all the research and introduced these standards.
Sure.
But it was not Prabhupada's standard, and a lot of things in ISKCON today have nothing to do with what Prabhupada's original standard was. And somehow or other, all the way from leading kirtan to how to cook, to what to cook, when to cook, and how complicated devotees are making things when Prabhupada never made it that complicated. Yeah, it's an issue, and especially with many Prabhupada disciples, they say, "What is going on? The world's gone mad," because that's not how Prabhupada did it. Right, and it's that is a concern with many of us older devotees, right? Especially with cooking, and especially with kirtan and deity worship, and there's even stories that Prabhupada never authorized worship of Govardhan Shila. Right. And that was something that came after his disappearance.
Right. When I did the deity worship course in Mayapur, we were talking to Pankajangri and Jananivas Prabhus, and we're talking about Govardhan Shila worship, and they were like, Prabhupada didn't say anything about it, so we can't say anything about it. That's what they said.
So there's many, many things that have crept in. Right. That's because we have been a little bit too mixy with other Vaishnava groups, and Prabhupada wanted us not to take, instructions and directions and standards from other Vaishnava groups, because this ISKCON is Prabhupada, and Prabhupada is ISKCON, and we're following his standards. Otherwise, it becomes a complete chaos, and that's what Prabhupada wanted us to avoid. Right. And it's a big history, but this is what's happening.
Right. I follow Kurma Prabhu's Facebook page, and I'm amazed how he lives his life in Ireland. Can you just ask him to describe what is his routine like? Tell us a little bit about your daily routine.
Yeah, well, we get up, at the moment, it's easy to get up before Brahma Muhurta, because sunrise is at like 8 something at the moment. But by the middle of the year, sunrise is about 5 o'clock, and that's because we have daylight saving. But otherwise, it will be 4 o'clock. But otherwise, myself and Dira Lalita, we definitely always try to be up before Brahma Muhurta, and that's the first thing, because Prabhupada wanted all his disciples and to rise early in the morning. Yeah, and that means rise before Brahma Muhurta. So that's what we do, and we get up by 3 or 4 in the morning, and then I just chant Hare Krishna, and I chant my japa. I do some exercise. I think about what we're going to prepare for breakfast, and I prepare it. We have Bhagavatam class every morning, 7 days a week. We're studying the 5th canto at the moment. The wonderful
Just between you and
dear
Mataji.
Lisa and myself, and that's
Right.
just us two, and that's just wonderful. That's definitely Dear Lilita's highlight of the day. It's also my highlight.
Wonderful.
We're reading the residents of what are we reading, Dear Lilita?
Prayers of the residents of Jambu.
Prayers of the residents of Jambudali, prayers of Prahlad Maharaj.
Wonderful.
Namo Bhagavate Narasimhaya Namaste Tejasiya Vira Vira Bhava Vajranaka. Wonderful verses. So we're studying the Bhagavatam. It's the highlight of our day. And then we take breakfast at 9 o'clock, and then we do whatever we have to do. My wife's studying at the moment, doing an online course. There's various gardening duties, there's correspondence, there's cleaning, and then a little bit later on, I worship the shalagrams and the Govardhan Shila and look after Tulsi. We're growing nice Tulsi plants, and a 1,000 other things.
Wonderful. Very
and
nice.
then evening Bhagavad Gita class.
Okay. Very nice. That's definitely Srila Prabhupada's program. Srimad Bhagavatam in the morning.
We're trying to keep it real. Yes.
Very nice.
Prabhupada said it's the ISKCON sandwich.
Right.
The morning program, the evening program, and whatever your service is the filling.
Okay.
So that's our life.
Right. Hare Krishna Prabhu, my basis, all goes to Prabhupada. Is it true when Prabhupada said that raw diet is the best diet?
No, here's another one. I tell you the backstory to this is that Nanda Kumar, Prabhupada's servant, was he was into Hatha Yoga, raw food diet. He kept himself very fit and very healthy, and he still does to this very day. He tells this story, and he tells it with a proviso. He said that Prabhupada was encouraging me to. He said that yes, actually, raw food is the best, according to Nanda Kumar. He said to Nanda Kumar, raw food is the best, but I have not introduced this into our society because whatever the rest of the sentence, I can't remember.
We can attract with raw food,
I don't know. I don't know how much of that story to take on board.
Right.
We never saw Prabhupada eat raw food. They gave Prabhupada type of raw salads and things like that after his stroke in 1960, whatever it was, 69. And he called the devotees into his room and he said, I want to speak to the starvation committee. And he chastised them for giving him all this stuff. He said, I'm not eating this. I want regular prasadam, dal, rice, chapatis.
Wow.
No starvation food.
Wow.
So, I don't know how much of that story, with all due respect to Nanda Kumar, we can apply. But he did say that if devotees want to eat raw food and it's good for their health and it's good for their lifestyle, then no harm.
Yeah.
I don't think we can't legislate, the whole change of lifestyle from that one comment.
I know I told you we're going to cap it at 2 hours, but it's been past. Are you okay to stay on longer?
Yeah. Look, I hope you don't mind.
No, I don't mind. I'm having a great time. There's a lot of questions coming in.
We've created a transcendental monster here.
Yeah. I love his invention of strawberry malpura with yogurt sauce. That's not a question, but did you create that?
No, that recipe was created by Vishnu Jana Swami.
Wow. Amazing.
And he used to cook it. He used to cook it on the Radha Damodar traveling Sankirtan buses, and they made so many devotees from that recipe.
Really? That's amazing.
There's a photograph I just saw the other day online. There's a pot. There's a picture of Vishnu Jana Swami. He's got a slotted spoon, and you can see some ghee dripping out from it. There's this big pot.
Yeah.
And that pot is full of ghee, and he's making strawberry malpuras fried in ghee, which is the only way to make malpuras. You can't cook them in anything else except ghee. And then lots of yogurt and fresh strawberries, and people will be lining up to join the bus party after eating those things. Like limited quantities of strawberry malpura. So that strawberry malpura was already around by the time I compiled the cookbook. It had become part of ISKCON kitchens everywhere. But it came from Vishnu Jana Swami.
Very nice. Okay, here's another one. I love your books. Long ago, I used to watch your videotapes. I cook in a temple for 15 years. I'm a vegan now just because we learned so much about cow abuse and contamination, dairy industry. I'm definitely missing ghee. Sad reality, isn't it? What do you think Srila Prabhupada would say about it today? Veganism.
Right. This was the part of our conversation that I was dreading, but
I was just, oh my God, me too. I was like, should I ask him about it? I don't know. In my mind, I was like, no, maybe I should stay away from that. Anyway, we're here now.
I've lost a few friends over this issue, but
Wow.
look, for instance, I've got a devotee friend, a very good friend. He's bringing up his children. He's actually got one boy. He's bringing up his son as a vegan, and he said, "My son has never taken any dairy products in his life. He's never drank milk, and he's never going to, as long as I can arrange, decide for him."
Right.
And I thought to myself, well, look, I respect this devotee, and I respect that he makes thoughtful decisions. But I'm thinking, this is not part of Prabhupada's instructions about drinking milk. Now, there's a whole lot of discussion about what things. There's an acharya. The acharya can change things according to time, place, and circumstance. Some things are carved in stone. We always chant Hare Krishna, but then Prabhupada established certain standards. Like brahmacharis moving in the temple, which was never done before, and other standards. So people are saying, well, now this is another stage of our development in ISKCON. And, veganism is something which has to be applied. I have many respected elder godbrothers who are practically vegans, more or less. And, it's not a small thing. But the thing with vegan diet is that Prabhupada never actually refrained from using commercial dairy products any time that he was with us. And he knew in America at the time that milk was contaminated with cod liver oil. Now, you know what cod liver oil is? It's oil extracted from the liver of cods.
Fish, right?
Atlantic fish.
Yeah.
Cod liver oil. That's certainly not a very nice thing to consume. Not only consume, but offer to the deity. Prabhupada knew that the milk had cod liver oil. But he wanted to establish, a society based on cow protection, and his instructions have always been that we should utilize the gifts of Mother Cow, and whenever dairy products are available, we should offer them to Krishna. And there's no alternatives to using milk, and all this stuff is practically written word for word in Prabhupada's books, because it develops higher brain substance so that we can understand spiritual life.
Okay.
And he knew that the dairy industry in America was no more contaminated than it is now, more or less. And he knew, but he said, because that's all the milk that's available, then therefore, yes, offer it to Krishna, because it's too important. It's too important not to offer milk to Krishna. Prabhupada was pragmatic. He was practical. And his terminology in this case would be to make use of a bad bargain. The bad bargain is that you've got milk which is contaminated. And in this case today, people are arguing that, yes, the meat industry is cruel. Yes, cows are being slaughtered. Yes, that was going on in the 70s. Prabhupada knew it, and nothing's changed in that regards. Prabhupada said that we should take gold from a filthy place, or we should take nectar from a pot of poison. This is quoting Chanakya Pandit. These are very practical axioms.
Yeah.
So even though something's contaminated, it's so important, like in the example of gold. Gold is so valuable, even if it's in a pot of stool or in a urinal. You just take it out and you wash it and you use it. So similarly, milk is not, modern dairy is not up to standard. But if you can't get ahimsa milk, and if we still haven't got it together in ISKCON to have many, many farms with lots and lots of wonderful cows that are providing unlimited milk, which is very unfortunate, then you may have to offer, shop bought milk to the deity. You can't offer vegan milk sweets. I mean, there's some temples, don't get me started, but there's some temples where they offer vegan sweets to Krishna. Krishna is a cowherd boy, not a soybean farmer. So it's really anyway, it's a huge subject. But yes, in answer to that specific question, Prabhupada, I don't think, but then of course, I have godbrothers who are senior to myself, very well respected, wonderful devotees, who would give you some very solid arguments to the opposite.
Yes, exactly.
And they do. And so what can I say? But
anyway,
my opinion is I mean, I offer milk to the deities, and I buy organic milk,
Yeah.
and we just found a source that has organic, unpasteurized, unhomogenized milk,
Like raw
and
milk.
raw milk, and we can get that here too. And as much as I can, I use that and offer that to Krishna.
Very
That's
nice.
the best I can do at this point. And the people that look after the cows, they're nice people, and they love cows. And what can you do? You have to be practical. That's the bottom line. And
Yeah.
some people, have a different opinion, but that's, you're asking my opinion, and that's my opinion.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Around here, we get milk from Gitanagri. 3 hours away is our Gitanagri farm, and they actually have a great organized way of giving half-gallon milks and selling it to all the devotees, and all the devotees get it. So if you're on this area, then that's what you can do. But thank you for that. Let's move on. In your opinion, how should ISKCON Sunday feast cooking change to be more healthier or palatable, or is this not an issue? I know we touched on this.
Yeah, we touched on it. Look, and every temple's different. There may be some temples out there that have got really high standards. There are, but not as high as they were in the 70s. In the 70s, it was spectacular. Now, the Sunday feast has been, in some places, has been minimized. I know there's some places where they've tried to revive the whole Sunday feast thing to make it a wonderful, wonderful event with a spectacular feast. There's a lot of work to be done still.
Right. Okay. Okay, here. Oh, this is another controversial thing. Grains on festivals. Gurpurnima, Janmashtami, the day there's a grain feast, and then there's a non-grain feast. Or is that what they're talking about? No, is the next day?
Yeah, like in the old days for Gurpurnima, we used to cook a whole big feast of grains and offer it and take prasadam.
Right. On Janmashtami at midnight. I mean, on Janmashtami, when you would eat that in the night, you would eat a grain feast.
Well, we did, and we were in Australia, and sometimes we just got, we were just not up to date with all the different changes of rules and things. I mean, Prabhupada in the early days, the devotees were looking forward to this huge feast at midnight because they'd been fasting all day. You know the story. And then at midnight, Prabhupada cut up an apple. And because Prabhupada wanted us that we would fast completely. But then he realized that this was not going to be possible. But by the time I was cooking feasts and everything, and I cooked many Gurpurnimas and Janmashtamis and Ram Navamis and Radhastamis, and every year, this argument comes up, should we be having a grain feast, a non-grain feast? Some devotees come to Gurpurnima feast and they're horrified. What are you doing? You're serving grains. This is supposed to be an Ekadasi feast.
Right.
And then the answer comes back, well, this is how we used to do it. And this is when Prabhupada was with us, this is how we used to do it.
Yeah.
So it goes round and around and around and around, and it's a huge subject, and it's too big for tonight's conversation.
Definitely. Yeah. Thank you. I think that's the end of the questions here. Abai Kurana, we already discussed this. What about following Ekadashi and Janmashtami Gurpurnima? We just discussed that. Grains on. Okay. Well. Let's have a concluding thought. I just wanted to ask you a little bit about the next generation of cooks. Like, if someone wants to be a cook or someone is interested in it, what do you recommend for them to do?
Well, I recommend that they learn how to cook by following the footsteps of the previous acharyas. Get, Jamuna's cookbook, get my cookbooks, and there's other devotees that have written nice cookbooks, and just cook them and learn how to cook those, because they are basically recipes that Prabhupada was cooked, and Prabhupada showed us how to cook. You can't really, this is parampara. I would say it, like people ask me, how do I become a good cook? I say, just follow recipes. That's what recipe books are for. Yeah. These recipes have been distilled and passed down from, some of the recipes in my books were the original recipes that Prabhupada gave, to various devotees. And some of those recipes actually Prabhupada cooked himself. Right. And so you can't get any more parampara than that. So just like we pass down spiritual knowledge from guru to disciple. So, I'm not sort of like glorifying myself, but I spent years writing these books, and Jumana spent many more years writing her books. There's thousands of recipes, literally. there's 600 recipes in her books. I've got like 1,200 recipes or something. There's like 2,000 recipes that you can cook. So, I mean, how many more recipes do you need? If you want to be a good cook, just start off by becoming an expert at following recipes that have been well loved over the decades.
Yeah.
I think that's my humble advice.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, Kurma Prabhu, thank you so much for joining me for this fantastic conversation. I had such a great time.
I'm on a roll here, but
you're on a roll here. If anyone wants to get in contact with Kurma Prabhu, here's his email address: kurmadas@gmail.com. Please get in touch with him. He's also active on Facebook. I love your posts about your growing different things and your deities and all the things you're doing there in Ireland. It's really wonderful. And there's not much more I can say. I'm just totally elated that we had such an amazing, informative, entertaining conversation. Thank you again so much.
Namaste, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, Prabhu, stay on a little bit longer. I'm going to turn off the live, but that's episode 43 with Kurma Prabhu. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.